Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We were talking about at-ta'wil in the previous track, which stemmed from the discussion talking about acknowledging and accepting everything that the Prophet has brought. And we said that your ta'wil needs to have a basis, otherwise it simply amounts to al-jahad, which is rejection. Now there is another concept as well, which is the concept of al-imtina', which is when you refrain from obeying the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ, be it an amr or a nahi, not because you do not agree with the order. So in other words, you disobey the Prophet not because you reject the order, you say no, this order is not correct. Rather you accept the order, but you believe that the actions you are doing do not come under the remit of this order or prohibition. So basically this person says that this particular action that I'm doing, it does not come under this order or prohibition. So for example, in Sunan Abi Dawud, the Prophet ﷺ sent his companion Abu Burda to go and kill a man who had married the former wife of his father. And he ordered that his wealth be split up into 5 sections. And that is what you do with the spoils of war. In other words, the Prophet deemed this particular person to be killed as a murtad, as a kafir. Now why was this? Well, if this person to be killed did not know about the ruling in the Quran, وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا مَا نَكَحَ آبَاؤُكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, and do not marry the women your fathers have married. If this person did not know about this ruling, then you cannot punish him. But the point is the Prophet punished him. Now why did he punish him? The perpetrator must have known about the ruling or about the ayah in the Quran, but he was punished not because he rejected this ayah of the Quran, but because his position was that what I am doing does not come under the remit of this particular ayah. Meaning this ayah does not apply to my particular action of marrying the wife of my father. So notice he did not make jahad or rejection of the actual ayah, but rather he made al-imtina', which is when you refrain from something. So he refrained from obeying the ayah under the pretext that this ayah does not apply to him and to his particular action which he is doing. We find in Sunan Abi Dawud the Prophet had him killed as a murtad. And what tells us that he's a kafir is because his wealth, the Prophet says, وَأَن يُخَمِّسَ مَالَهُ, that his wealth should be divided up into 5 parts. Now we know that the fay, which is the spoils of war, which is when you take the wealth of the kuffar without actually fighting them, so they flee away, that is to be divided up into 5 parts. Another example of al-imtina' is during the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa, there were people who stopped paying the zakah. They said that the evidences of zakah do not apply to them. They did not reject the ayat of zakah. They said, yes, it's wajib to give zakah, we agree. But they said, we are not being addressed in the order of giving zakah. That's their position. It's different to making al-jahad. So there's a difference between al-imtina' and al-jahad. These people said that the zakah is only to be given to the Prophet, not to Abu Bakr. And we know what happened there. Abu Bakr fought them as kuffar. They were not people of jahad, they were people of al-imtina'. As for the man who married the woman who had been married to his father, then he did not reject this particular ayah. In the days of Jahiliyyah, a man would marry the woman his father had married as an honoring to his father. So for a man to marry a woman that his father had married would be a type of honoring to his father. This was the Jahiliyyah thought. This was seen as a type of bir to your father, when you treat your parents nicely and honor them. Now this man did not say that the ayah is to be rejected. Rather he thought, or he held the view that this ayah does not apply to him. So it's his position to say that I do not enter into the remit of this ayah. And something like this would make you into a kafir. So al-jahad will make you into a kafir, and al-imtina' also makes you into a kafir. The Sheikh then goes on to say, وَلَا نَخُوضُ فِي اللَّهِ وَلَا نُمَارِي فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ, and we do not delve deeply about Allah, meaning the essence of Allah, and we do not argue in the deen of Allah. The people of bid'ah are the ones who talk deeply about the essence of Allah Jalla wa Ala. The problem with that is that you will start to say things about which there is no evidence from the text. And so you're speaking about matters of the unseen, without evidence, and you are bound to go astray. And this is the trait of the Ahlul Kalam, the people of the speech, because they speak deeply about all matters, including matters which they ought not to be speaking about, because they are matters of the unseen, and you ought to keep quiet about them. And he says, we do not dispute about the deen of Allah. So you find many shubuhat, many specious arguments, and many doubtful matters being circulated by the people of bid'ah. You do not argue with these people about these matters. Let's take some talking points. As far as the essence of Allah Jalla wa Ala is concerned, we are not allowed to discuss these matters. And as we said, these are the traits of the Ahlul Bid'ah. And neither are we allowed to think about how Allah Jalla wa Ala looks like. Rather, what we must be pondering over are the ni'mah of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and also His creation, His signs. These are the matters which we ponder over. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith narrated by At-Tabarani in his book Al-Awsat, graded Hasan by Sheikh Al-Albani, the Prophet said, تَفَكَّرُوا فِي آلَاءِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تَفَكَّرُوا فِي ذَاتِ اللَّهِ فَاتَّهْلِكُوا. Ponder over the blessings of Allah, but do not ponder over Allah Himself, meaning His essence, for in that case you will be destroyed. So the signs of Allah Jalla wa Ala are two types. Firstly, the universal signs of the heavens and the earth, and how this universe and nature works. And secondly, the Shara'i signs, which are the ayat of the Quran. You ought to be pondering over both of these types of signs, because they are both signs of Allah. And both of these signs cannot be reproduced by man. As for the universal signs, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Verily, in the creations of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of the night and the day, there are signs for a people of sound intellect. Likewise, قُلْ انظُرُوا مَاذَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا تُغْنِي الْآيَاتُ وَالنُّذُرُ عَنْ قَوْمٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Say, look at what is in the heavens and the earth, but the signs nor the warners will avail a people who believe not. Darda narrated about the companion Abu Darda. She said that most of his ibadah would be at-tafakkur, would be pondering. Tafakkur in the ayat of Allah develops a fearful and soft heart, which makes the eyes cry from the fear of Allah Jalla wa Ala. In Sunan at-Tirmidhi, authentically, the Prophet ﷺ said, عَيْنَانِ لَا تَمَسُّهُمَا النَّارِ عَيْنٌ بَكَتْ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ وَعَيْنٌ بَاتَتْ تَحْرِسُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. There are two types of eyes that the fire will not touch. One eye which cries out of the fear of Allah, and another eye which spends the night guarding the Muslim land in the path of Allah. So basically these are the guard duties of the borders of the Islamic land. So these two eyes then will be saved from the fire of Jahannam. And also about the 7 who will be shaded on a day in which there will be no other shade. And from amongst the 7 in the authentic hadith, رَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. A man who remembers Allah in privacy and his eyes flow with tears. So the question is, how do you make these ayat of the Quran have this type of an effect on you? Well, it certainly does not happen simply by reciting them or reading them. It needs to happen by, firstly, yes, reciting them, but then secondly, understanding the meaning and just taking your time pondering over what the ayah is saying, instead of moving on to the next ayah and reading that. Just as you would, for example, read a book. You'd read a sentence, then you read the next sentence, and so on and so forth until the end of the book. No, the Quran is different. Here you would read the ayah, you would understand what the ayah is saying, and you would take your time in pondering over what the ayah has said to you. And you would not just simply move on to the next ayah. And the other important talking point we take, that we do not argue about the matters of the deen. And what we intend here is al-mughalaba, when you want to score points over the other person and have the upper hand over them. In the Sunan of Abi Dawud, authentically, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَا زَعِيمٌ بِبَيْتٍ فِي رَبَضِ الْجَنَّةِ لِمَنْ تَرَكَ الْمِرَاءَ وَإِنْ كَانَ مُحِقًّا. I give a guarantee of a house on the edge of Jannah for the one who leaves off argumentation even if he is in the right. وأنا زعيم ببيت في وسط الجنة لمن ترك الكذب وإن كان مازحا. I give a guarantee of a house in the middle of Jannah for the one who leaves off lying even if he is only joking. وأنا زعيم ببيت في أعلى الجنة لمن حسن خلقه. And I give a guarantee of a house in the highest part of Jannah for the one who has goodly character. So why are these disputes discouraged then, as you've just heard in this hadith? Well, the reason is because when people dispute, they are doing it to score points, so that they could stroke their egos. Oh, I can beat the other person in an argument. That makes me so good. It's that type of attitude. And this is no good, because then you're taking the deen of Islam as a means to stroke your ego and feel good about yourself. And there's no virtue in this. You're not doing it to support the truth. And that's why people argue. It is to simply score points and feel good about themselves, as if this is some sort of sport. Imam Ahmad was asked about this argumentation. He was asked, a man is upon the Sunnah, should he argue for the Sunnah? And Imam Ahmad replied, لا يخبر بالسنة فإن قبلت منه وإلا سكت. He said, no, he should not argue and dispute. Rather, what he should do, he should just inform of what the Sunnah is. If it is accepted from him, that's all well and good. Otherwise, he just remains quiet. And that's it. You've done your job. You've done your job in conveying what the Sunnah is, with its evidence and rationale and so on. So you've put forward your case in a rationally acceptable way, using evidences and using reason. Now, if after that it is not accepted, then for you to go on arguing would actually be doing this just to score points and for self-gratification. And that is to be rebuked. Rather, if your message is not accepted, you just remain quiet and leave the company of those who will not obey the Sunnah. But do not try to score points over the other person. Argumentation of this sort, when you try to score points, it will just give birth to enmity and hatred, which clearly is no good in a Muslim society. Okay, then the Sheikh goes on to say, وَلَا نُجَادِلُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ وَنَشْهَدُ أنه كلام رب العالمين. And we do not dispute about the Quran, and we witness that it is the speech of the Rabbul Alameen, نزل به الروح الأمين, the trustworthy spirit was sent down with it, فعلمه سيد المرسلين محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم, and he taught it to the leader of the messengers, Muhammad عليه الصلاة والسلام, وهو كلام الله تعالى لا يساويه شيء من كلام المخلوقين, and it is the speech of Allah, nothing of the speech of the creation equals it or rivals it. ولا نقول بخلقه, and we do not say that this speech is created. ولا نخالف جماعة المسلمين, and we do not oppose the main body of the Muslimin. So as for the Iman in the Quran, then we have to have Iman, the acknowledgement with submission that it is the speech of Allah and it has been sent down by Allah Jalla wa Ala onto Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam via Jibreel alayhi salam. And we have to have Iman that the Quran does not resemble any of the speech of the creation, nor does the speech of creation rival the Quran. And it is also necessary to affirm that the Quran is not created. Rather, it is a speech of Allah which is His attribute, and the attributes of Allah are not created, just like Allah is not created. And we have evidences for each of these statements. So, for example, it's the speech of Allah, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ أَبْلِغْهُ مَأْمَنَهُ. If anyone from the mushrikeen seeks your protection, then give him protection so that he may listen to the speech of Allah and then deliver him to his place of safety. What about Jibreel bringing it down? وَإِنَّهُ لَتَنْزِيلُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. And verily it is a sending down from the Rabbul Alameen. نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينَ. The trustworthy spirit came down with it. عَلَى قَلْبِكَ لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُنذِرِينَ بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ. On your heart, so that you may become one of the warners in the clear Arabic language. So what is this idea about not arguing over the Quran? Well, we have in the Sahih, the Prophet ﷺ heard a couple of people arguing about the Quran, and we could see that his face was red, and he said to the people, اقرأوا القرآن ما اختلفت عليه قلوبكم فإذا اختلفتم فقوموا. Recite the Quran as long as your hearts are in agreement with it, but when you differ, then stand up and part ways. And the reason for this is the same as what we have given before. People do this to score points, for isti'ala, to try to make oneself higher than the other. And this is all a matter of stroking one's ego, and there is no goodness in that. The only thing which is praiseworthy in all of this is to simply make plain the truth and its evidence, and its wajhud dilala, meaning to say, you give the ruling, you give the evidence for the ruling, and how this evidence proves the ruling. That's the wajhud dilala. It's the bridge between the evidence and the ruling you are trying to portray. It's that bridge, the wajhud dilala. Make that plain. If it is accepted from you, that's all well and good. If it is not accepted from you, then you've done your job and you need to do no further. But certainly you do not want to be stroking your own ego, trying to score points. The Sheikh says, وَنَشْهَدُ أَنَّهُ كَلَامُ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ, and we witness that it is the speech of the Rabb al-Alameen. He goes on to say that the trustworthy spirit brought it down. He's referring to Jibreel alayhi salam, and he taught it to the leader of the messengers. Of course, that is the last prophet, and we do not say that it is created, and we do not oppose the main congregation of the Muslims. Okay, let's take some talking points. The first issue is this idea of the mujadala, meaning a dispute or argumentation. And this happens when two people have differing views and they each bring forth their evidences supporting their view. And they bring forth arguments to refute the opposing view. Now, mujadala then can be madhmoom, which is rebuked. And the rebuked type of mujadala is when you do it for self-gratification, to score points. And the focus is not on supporting the truth, the focus is on winning, as if this is some sort of sport. On the other hand, we can have a praiseworthy type of argumentation, where your only aim is to arrive at the truth, and to make plain the evidence for this truth. And this is called arguing in a manner that is best. As Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and argue with them in ways that are better. إِنَّ رَبَّكَ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ ضَلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. Your Rabb knows better about those who have gone astray from his path and about those who are guided. That is in Surah Al-Nahl, and in Surah Al-Ankabut he says about the Ahlul Kitab, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْهُمْ. And do not argue with the people of the book except with that which is better, except those who transgress amongst them. Meaning to say, as for those who will not be listening to the truth, they're not interested, they just want to argue because they're argumentative people, they want to score points over you, and simply making plain to them the truth is not going to prove to be beneficial, then for these types of people, they have made a dhulm, so you do not argue with them. In other words, you simply leave them. And this is the rule that we need to follow. If a person you know will not be listening to you, no matter how beautifully you can convey the message of Islam, or you can convey the truth or the sunnah, he is not going to listen to you, he's made up his mind, then in a case like this, that person is a zalim and you do not dispute with him. Because you can simply get people who are argumentative. That is in their nature. And they will argue even if it is for the batil. Many of the mushrikun were like this. In Surah Az-Zukhruf, وَلَمَّا ضُرِبَ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ مَثَلًا إِذَا قَوْمُكَ مِنْهُ يَصِدُّونَ وَقَالُوا أَآلِهَتُنَا خَيْرٌ أَمْ هُوَ مَا ضَرَبُوهُ لَكَ إِلَّا جَدَلًا بَلْ هُمْ قَوْمٌ خَصِمُونَ. And when the son of Maryam was set as an example, your people started to laugh. This refers to the time when Allah Jalla wa Ala said, إِنَّكُمْ وَمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ حَصَبُ جَهَنَّمَ أَنْتُمْ لَهَا وَارِدُونَ. You and what you worship will be the fuel for the hellfire, you will enter it. So the mushrikun gave a parable. They said, well, Isa alayhi salam is also worshipped, so does that mean he will also be in Jahannam? So you see that they are bringing forth the parable of Isa alayhi salam just by way of argumentation, to score points over the Prophet. Allah Jalla wa Ala goes on, وَقَالُوا أَآلِهَتُنَا خَيْرٌ أَمْ هُوَ مَا ضَرَبُوهُ لَكَ إِلَّا جَدَلًا بَلْ هُمْ قَوْمٌ خَصِمُونَ. They said, are our gods better or is he better? They're saying that our gods are better than Isa alayhi salam and more worthy to be worshipped. Allah said that they only brought forth this parable just for the sake of argumentation, just to score points and to throw red herrings at you to justify their denial of the truth. Allah says that nay, they are a quarrelsome people. In the authentic hadith, أبغض الرجال عند الله يوم القيامة الألد الخصم. The most hated person to Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah will be the argumentative person. So he's the type of compulsive arguer. Likewise, authentically, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا ضَلَّ قَوْمٌ بَعْدَ هُدًى كَانُوا عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا وَقَدْ أُوتُوا الْجَدَلِ. No people went astray after they were upon guidance, except that they were given argumentation. They started to become a quarrelsome people, argumentative, debating, where there ought to be no debates and argumentation. Another example of arguing for falsehood, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِي حَاجَّ إِبْرَاهِيمَ فِي رَبِّهِ أَنْ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ الْمُلْكَ. Did you not know about the one who disputed with Ibrahim regarding his Rabb, just because Allah gave this person the dominion? So this type of argumentation, the king did not want to arrive at the truth. Rather, he had made up his own mind and was going to defend his batil, come what may. And in the end, he was silenced, because people of falsehood will always be silenced in the end. So a mujadala, where you would quote the Quran, give the evidence from it, and why this evidence proves your point. So this is fine, as you are making plain the truth. But another type is when you make the ayat contradict each other, or that you take ruling from the mutashabih without referring to these mutashabih ayat to the muhkam. Or for example, delving into matters of the unseen using purely your intellect. So all of this is to be rebuked. The next talking point is that those from this ummah who do not submit to the text of the Quran and the Sunnah are the most argumentative types. This is because they have based their madhab on their desires. And so when there comes a text from the Quran or authentic Sunnah which refutes their madhab, they become argumentative. And so what they would do then is that they would fight the evidence with evidence. So if an ayah of the Quran contradicts what they are saying, they will bring forth another ayah of the Quran to contradict the ayah which is contradicting their madhab. Like this, they would pit the ayat of the Quran against themselves, one against the other. And this happened once during the time of the Sahaba, as has been narrated. Two companions were arguing about the Quran. One was bringing an ayah and the other one was bringing another ayah to contradict that first ayah which the first person brought. And this made the Prophet ﷺ angry. He told the people, اقرأوا القرآن ما اختلفت عليه قلوبكم فإذا اختلفتم فقوموا. Recite the Quran as long as you agree with it, so your hearts are united on the ayat of the Quran. But when you differ, then you part ways. Because in argumentation, there will be no good which results from it, only bitterness and envy and hatred. So as for those ayat which are unclear in their meaning, so they could be interpreted this way or the other, then they must be referred or understood in the light of those ayat which are singular in their meaning, which do not allow for any one interpretation this way or that. In Surah Hud, Allah begins, Alif Lam Ra, Kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu, thumma fussilat min ladun hakimin khabir. Alif Lam Ra, a book in which whose ayat have been made muhkam, singular in meaning, nothing wishy-washy about them, and they have been explained in detail from the Hakim, the Khabir. Likewise in Surah Yasin, Yasin wal Qur'anil Hakim. Yasin by the Hakim Quran. So in other words, it is muhkam. It is well done in terms of its eloquence, its language, and also muhkam as in singular in meaning. So really the whole Quran is muhkam. Yes, it's true, there could be mutashabih ayat which could have one interpretation or another, but if those mutashabihat are seen in the light of the muhkam, so you bring it all together, then the whole Quran actually is muhkam when it comes to the meaning of the words. Yes, sure, we may not know how these words or their meaning manifest. So for example, the attributes of Allah, we understand what they mean, but there's no way we know how it all manifests, so that we will never know. But as far as the meaning is concerned, then yes, the whole of the Quran is muhkam. And none would dispute this fact except those who want to obfuscate this situation, because they're trying to throw red herrings to promote their madhab made out of the fabric of their own desires and whims. We may also say that the whole of the Quran is mutashabih, not in the sense that its meaning is unclear, but mutashabih in the sense that it resembles each other. So the Quran resembles each other in terms of its eloquence, in terms of its truth, in terms of its guidance, even in terms of the information given. You see many of the ayat of Tawheed repeated, many of the stories are repeated in similar ways. Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadithi kitaban mutashabihan mathani. Allah sends down the best of speech, a book, its part resemble each other and it is repeated. And we may also say that part of the Quran is muhkam and part of the Quran is mutashabih. And this is where Allah says, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. He is the one who sent the book on you. From them there are ayat which are muhkamat, singular in meaning. They are the main element of the book. So if you like, the capital city of a country is the main city of the country. So you refer all matters to these ayat. And others are mutashabihat. So they could be interpreted this way or that way. But they are not as much as the muhkamat. So you do not follow these mutashabihat and interpret it the way your desires dictate. Rather, you return these matters or these ayat to the muhkamat. So in summary, we can say that the whole of the Quran is muhkam if we understand muhkam to be singular in meaning and has a clear meaning, and also if we understand muhkam to mean well made or well done. It is well done and perfected in its truth and in its justice and in its eloquence, that it does not resemble any speech of man. And secondly, we can say the whole of the Quran is mutashabih if we understand mutashabih to mean resembling each other. It resembles each other in the truth and in the justice and in the eloquence and even in the information that is given. And thirdly, we can say some of the Quran is muhkam and other parts are mutashabih. So that is to say, some ayat with clear meaning and some ayat whose meanings are difficult to obtain. And you could interpret it this way or that. So those people who have a disease in their heart, they are going to promote the mutashabih. Because it is easy to take the mutashabihat and to interpret it in such a way which promotes and aids your desires and whims. However, it needs to be said that anything which you do not understand from the Quran, it does not mean that it is not understandable. Rather, there will be other ulama who do understand it. So there is nothing in the Quran which nobody understands, absolutely no one in the world. No, because the Quran came down بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ, in the clear Arabic language, and the Arabic language is understood. The question that could arise is that why did Allah Jalla wa'ala therefore have these mutashabihat in the Quran? And the answer is that this is a trial, because with these mutashabihat, we will now see who is the one who's going to submit to the ayat of the Quran. So just because you do not understand, does that now mean that it simply makes no sense? Or does it mean that you personally do not understand because of your personal shortcoming? Are you going to be so proud and arrogant so as to say that just because I do not understand, therefore this makes no sense whatsoever? Or are you going to take the more humble approach and say just because I do not understand, it does not necessarily mean that it is not understandable? But the one who properly ponders over the Quran will find there to be no contradictions. Allah Jalla wa'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not ponder over the Quran? وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it had been from other than Allah, they would have found in it many contradictions or discrepancies. But the fact that you find some discrepancies in the Quran simply means that you have not pondered over it. That's why Allah says, have they not pondered over the Quran? But the key point is that all the people of Dalalah, be it the Murji'ah, the Qadariyah, Mu'tazila, Jabariyah, Jahmiyah, any of those and others, they all argue for falsehood to try to vanquish the truth, as Allah Jalla wa'ala says in Surah Ghafir, وَجَادَلُوا بِالْبَاطِلِ لِيُدْحِضُوا بِهِ الْحَقَّ. And they argue for falsehood in order to overcome the truth. The third issue is when he says that we witness that the Quran is the speech of Allah. We have spoken about this before. The Quran being the speech of Allah, what does that mean? It means that this Quran is composed of letters and words and sentences which have meaning. All of this is from Allah, spoken verbally, which Jibreel alayhi salam heard and then conveyed to the Prophet, who himself heard it from Jibreel. So Jibreel hears from Allah and the Prophet hears it from Jibreel. So it's the spoken speech of Allah. It is not the written speech of Allah. The Quran is written, but in the Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, which is of course not with us. He says, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ. So I take the oath by the places of the stars. إِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. This is a great oath if only you knew. إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ. It is a noble Quran. فِي كِتَابٍ مَكْنُونٍ. In a concealed book. That's the Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. And he goes on to describe it. لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ. No one touches it except the purified ones. This has to refer to the Malaika, because humans are not mutahharun. Rather, at best they can be mutatahhirun. And there is a difference between these two words. Tatahhur is when you make wudu or you take your ghusl, come into the state of tahara. This is tatahhur. So then you become mutatahhir. That is not the same as being mutahhar, because mutahhar means that you are permanently in tahara, and that's simply not the case with humans. So we say that Jibreel alayhi salam did not take it from Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, written down. Rather, he took it from Allah by hearing him. Note that Tahaawiyyah rahimahullah says that نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينُ. The trustworthy ruh brought it down. Now, Jibreel alayhi salam is called a ruh. Ruh means life. So that which does not have a ruh does not have a life. Ruh often is translated to spirit, or it could even be soul. And he is the trustworthy spirit or soul, Al-Amin. So he can be trusted to do the job right and to deliver it to the one that Allah wants it to be delivered to, as opposed to making a mistake. Maybe he was supposed to deliver it to Ali radiallahu anhu, but he delivered it to Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam by mistake. So this type of thing is a lie. The Sheikh says that nothing of the speech of mankind equals it, and he said something similar before in our discussion on the Quran when we were speaking about what makes the Quran inimitable. And we mentioned a few opinions there, but we said ultimately it is because the speech of a divine being cannot be similar to the speech of a human being. Even between human beings we find immense discrepancy and differences in speech. The more educated people have a completely different style of speech than the less educated people. Just compare the posh type of language with the street type of language. There is a clear difference. You know which one is coming from where. So if there is great differences even between human speech, then the polarity between human speech and divine speech would be ever the more pronounced. And this is the reason why jinn and mankind are unable to produce the like thereof. Because by its very nature, human speech and divine speech are at an irreconcilable variance. Just like a human being and a divine being are at an irreconcilable variance. So you see the difference is just inherent and deeply rooted. And the reason why the Sheikh says that the speech of Allah does not equal to the speech of mankind is to tell us why it is that man is unable to produce the like of the Quran, because it inherently does not resemble the speech of man. Otherwise, if you think about it, to say that the speech of Allah does not equal the speech of man would be an insult to the speech of Allah. It's like saying Allah is stronger than you. Okay, whereas that might be true, but it's closer. But this statement, even if you are saying something positive about Allah, this statement is actually closer to being an insult to Allah than a praise, because to compare Allah to a human being in terms of strength would simply be an insult. Allah Jalla wa'ala is above and removed from comparisons like these. Okay, the next vital talking point is when he says that we do not say it is a creation. As we said before, the first person to say the Quran is created was a man by the name of Al-Ja'd ibn Dirham, and he said many deviant things, but this being amongst them. Then after that, this speech was inherited by Al-Jahm ibn Safwan, and then after that inherited by the Mu'tazila. We find that the Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila, Al-Khawarij and the Rafidah say that the Quran is a creation. So the problem is old, but it exists even to this day. Okay, let's take some review questions. Question number 1. Explain the difference between Al-Jahad, Al-Ta'wil and Al-Imtina'. identifying which ones are kufr and which ones are not. Question number 2. Argumentation could be blameworthy or praiseworthy. Explain when it is which. Question 3. Explain how the whole of the Quran is mutashabih, and how the whole of the Quran is muhkam, and how the whole of the Quran is both mutashabih and muhkam. So these are 3 possibilities. Explain how each of them arise.